The chamber was a cathedral of silence, a vast, echoing space carved from the heart of a sentient moon. Its walls, a mosaic of obsidian and crystallized starlight, seemed to absorb all sound, leaving only the weight of unspoken anxieties to press down upon the assembled figures. At the center of this immense hall, arranged in a perfect circle, sat the elder council of the Caithar Dominion. Each member was a monolith of ancient lineage and political power, their ceremonial robes of woven light casting long, distorted shadows across the polished floor. They were the architects of an empire that spanned 1,000 suns, a civilization that had bent the laws of physics to their will and had known no equal for millennia. Yet, tonight, an unprecedented fear, cold and sharp, had pierced the heart of their unshakable dominion. It was a fear born not of a rival empire or a cosmic cataclysm, but of a single, solitary vessel that had appeared at the edge of their sovereign space. A ship that defied every known principle of their advanced science. A ship that, by all their calculations, should not exist. High Counselor Valen, his form cloaked in robes of deepest indigo, gazed at the holographic representation of the anomaly that shimmered in the center of the council's circle. It was a vessel of stark, brutalist design, a wedge of impossible angles and a matte black hull that seemed to drink the light of nearby stars. It was small, almost laughably so, compared to the majestic, city-sized flagships of the Caithar fleet. Yet this insignificant vessel had effortlessly bypassed their most sophisticated sensor grids, their layers of impenetrable energy barriers, and the formidable armadas that stood sentinel at their borders. It had simply appeared, as if it had willed itself into existence in the heart of their dominion. The ship had made no hostile moves, transmitted no communications, and had not reacted to their hails. It simply sat there, a silent, inscrutable enigma, radiating a quiet confidence that was more terrifying than any declaration of war. The reports from the outer fleets are unchanged. A voice, thin and reedy, broke the oppressive silence. It was Counselor Zathras, his ancient face a mask of barely concealed panic. The vessel remains unresponsive. Our most powerful deep-range scans are inconclusive. The ship's hull seems to absorb our energy probes, to nullify them completely. We are blind to its internal workings, its power source, its crew, if it even has one. Valen's gaze remained fixed on the holographic ship. And its trajectory? He asked, his voice a low, resonant hum that carried the weight of centuries of command. That is the most unsettling aspect, High Counselor, Zathras replied, his voice trembling slightly. It has no trajectory. It is not in orbit around the star. It is not maintaining a fixed position relative to any celestial body. It is stationary, utterly and completely stationary in defiance of all gravitational forces. It is as if the very fabric of spacetime has been anchored around it. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the council. To defy gravity was one thing. The Caithar had mastered that art eons ago. But to create a localized point of absolute stillness in the chaotic dance of the cosmos was something else entirely. It was a feat of engineering that bordered on the divine or the demonic. And what of the beings associated with this vessel? Valen pressed, his voice now laced with a hint of steel. The ones who call themselves humans. A wave of unease washed over the chamber. The name itself felt alien on their tongues, a discordant note in the symphony of their ancient language. The humans, a species that had only recently, in the grand cosmic timescale, stumbled out of their cradle world and into the galaxy. A primitive, chaotic race known for their short, violent lifespans, their fragmented societies, and their emotional volatility. The Caithar had observed them from a distance for some time, deeming them of little consequence, a fleeting spark in the darkness of space that would inevitably extinguish itself. They were a species that should not have been capable of interstellar travel, let alone the kind of technology that was currently staring back at them from the void. Our archives on the humans are limited, admitted Counselor Lyra, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the rising tension. She was the council's chief xenologist, her mind a repository of knowledge on 1,000 alien cultures. They are a young race, barely a whisper in the history of the galaxy. Their technological advancement has been erratic, explosive even. They have a propensity for conflict, for self-destruction. But they also possess a strange, almost illogical resilience. Stubbornness that defies reason. Stubbornness does not build a ship that can anchor itself to the universe, Zathras countered, his voice sharp with frustration. This is not the work of primitives. This is the work of a civilization that has mastered forces we are only beginning to comprehend. We have underestimated them, dangerously so. Valen finally turned his gaze away from the holographic ship, his ancient eyes sweeping across the faces of his fellow council members. He saw fear, yes, but also a dawning realization. A realization that their understanding of the universe, of their own place in it, was about to be irrevocably shattered. "We have been blinded by our own arrogance," Valen said, his voice filling the vast chamber. "We saw a young, chaotic species and we dismissed them. We did not consider that their chaos might be a crucible, a forge that has tempered them into something unexpected. We must understand them. We must know their intentions, but we must proceed with caution. A species that can build such a vessel is a species that can unmake us." The silence that followed was heavier than before, filled with the unspoken weight of 1,000 possible futures, each one more terrifying than the last. The ship, the impossible ship, remained silent in the void, a harbinger of a new age, an age where the Caithar were no longer the undisputed masters of their own destiny. An age where humanity, the chaotic, emotional, unpredictable upstarts, had finally arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same. Days turned into weeks, and the human ship remained a silent, unmoving sentinel at the edge of Caithar space. The initial panic within the Dominion had subsided into a low, simmering anxiety. The council convened daily, their debates growing more heated, their philosophies clashing like tectonic plates. Some argued for a preemptive strike, a show of force to remind this nascent power of the Caithar's dominance. Others, like Lyra, advocated for a more cautious, diplomatic approach. They argued that a species capable of such technological marvels might also be capable of unimaginable destruction. To provoke them without understanding them would be suicide. Valen, for his part, remained a steady, calming presence, his wisdom a balm on the frayed nerves of the council. He listened to all arguments, weighed all possibilities, but in his heart, he knew that the old ways, the ways of conquest and intimidation, would not serve them here. The humans were different. Their silence was not the silence of fear, but of observation. They were watching, waiting, judging. And Valen knew with a certainty that chilled him to his core that the Caithar were the ones being tested. Spent his nights in the great library of the Dominion, a vast repository of knowledge that contained the history of 1,000,000 worlds. He searched for patterns, for precedents, for anything that might shed light on the enigma of humanity. He read of their wars, their art, their philosophies. He saw their capacity for great cruelty, for unimaginable violence. But he also saw something else, a flicker of something that was both alien and strangely familiar, a relentless, unyielding drive to understand. To explore, to reach for the stars, not just with their machines, but with their minds, their hearts, their very souls. It was during one of these late-night studies that a new piece of information reached him, a piece of information that would change everything. A junior archivist, a young Caithar with a passion for obscure alien cultures, had unearthed a forgotten data fragment, a piece of human communication that had been intercepted years ago and dismissed as meaningless noise. But the archivist, with his fresh perspective, had seen a pattern, a structure within the chaos. It was a story, a children's story to be precise. A simple tale about a small, unassuming creature who, through cleverness and courage, outwitted a much larger, more powerful predator. Valen read the translation, his ancient mind struggling to grasp the nuances of the alien narrative, but the message was clear. It was a story about the power of the underdog, the triumph of intellect over brute force. It was a story that celebrated not strength, but ingenuity. And as he read, a dawning realization began to form in his mind. The ship, the impossible ship, it was not a weapon of war, it was a statement, a message. A story told not in words, but in the language of physics. A story that said, "We are not what you think we are more." The day finally came when the human ship broke its silence. It was not a grand, dramatic announcement, but a simple, almost elegant transmission. A string of pure mathematical concepts, prime numbers, the value of pi, the golden ratio, a universal language that transcended culture and biology. The Caithar's finest cryptographers worked feverishly, but there was nothing to decode. It was not a message to be deciphered, but a greeting, an offering of shared knowledge, a gesture of peace. The council was thrown into turmoil. Some saw it as a trick, a clever deception to lull them into a false sense of security. Why others, like Lyra, saw it as a confirmation of her theories. The humans were not conquerors, they were explorers, scientists, thinkers. Valen, however, saw something more. He saw a reflection of the children's story. The small, clever creature offering a gift to the large, powerful predator, not as a sign of submission, but as an invitation. An invitation to a different kind of game, a game not of power, but of understanding. He made a decision that would send shockwaves through the Dominion, a decision that would be seen by many as an act of madness, of treason. He ordered the Caithar fleet to stand down, to lower their shields, to power down their weapons, and he sent a message back to the human ship, a message not of mathematical equations but of art, a complex, multi-layered piece of Caithar music, a symphony of light and sound that told the story of their civilization, their hopes, their fears, their journey through the cosmos. It was a gesture of vulnerability, of trust, a gamble of unprecedented proportions. For a long, agonizing moment, the void remained silent. The council chamber was a tomb of held breaths. Valen stood alone, his decision laid bare for all to see. He had staked the future of his civilization on a hunch, on a children's story, on a piece of music. He had offered the humans a glimpse into the Caithar soul, and now he waited to see if they would accept it or if they would crush it. Then the reply came. It was not music, not mathematics. It was an image, a simple, two-dimensional image projected onto the main view screen of the council chamber. It was a rendering of a humanoid hand, its 5 digits extended in a gesture of peace, and below it a single line of text, translated into the Caithar's own language. "We come in peace, we wish to learn." A wave of relief, so profound it was almost painful, washed over the council. The tension that had held them captive for so long finally broke. Some wept openly. Others simply stared at the image, a symbol of a future they had not dared to imagine. Valen, however, did not weep. He simply nodded, a slow, solemn gesture of acknowledgement. The game had begun, and for the first time in 1,000 years, the Caithar were not the ones making the rules. The first face-to-face meeting took place in a neutral space, a specially constructed habitat in the orbit of a gas giant, its swirling, iridescent clouds a breathtaking backdrop to a moment of unprecedented historical significance. The human delegation was small, a handful of individuals who walked into the grand reception hall with a quiet confidence that was both disarming and unsettling. They were smaller than the Caithar, their forms less imposing, their movements more fluid, less ritualized. They wore simple, functional garments, a stark contrast to the ornate, ceremonial robes of their hosts. Yet there was a presence about them, an intensity in their gaze that commanded respect. Valen, leading the Caithar delegation, met the human ambassador in the center of the hall. The human was a woman, her face a tapestry of lines that spoke of a life lived with emotion. It was a concept the Caithar, with their long, placid lifespans, struggled to comprehend. Her name was Ambassador Evelyn Reed. "High Counselor Valen," she said, her voice clear and steady, her pronunciation of his name flawless. "On behalf of the Terran Alliance, I thank you for your courage. It is not every day that a civilization of your stature chooses the path of peace over the path of fear." Valen inclined his head in a gesture of acknowledgement. "Ambassador Reed, your arrival in our dominion was unexpected. Your vessel, it defies our understanding of the universe." A faint smile touched the corners of Reed's lips. "Our ship is a statement of purpose, High Counselor. It is a symbol of our philosophy. We believe that the universe is not a thing to be conquered, but a thing to be understood. Our vessel does not move through space. It embraces it. It becomes one with it. It is a quiet place in the storm of the cosmos, a place for thought, for reflection." Valen felt a chill run down his spine. It was a philosophy so alien to the Caithar, with their history of conquest and expansion, that it was almost incomprehensible. And yet, it resonated with something deep within him, something he had only recently begun to discover, the part of him that had been moved by a children's story. The discussions that followed were long and complex, a delicate dance of diplomacy and philosophy. The humans, it turned out, were not a unified empire like the Caithar. They were a coalition, a messy, chaotic, often conflicted alliance of different nations and cultures, yet they were bound together by a shared set of principles, a belief in the value of knowledge, the sanctity of life, and the power of cooperation. They spoke of their history, of their long, bloody climb out of the mud of their home world. They spoke of their triumphs and their failures, their moments of great wisdom and their moments of profound foolishness. They were a species of contradictions, of extremes, capable of both great love and great hatred, great creativity and great destruction. And it was this duality, this embrace of their own imperfections, that gave them their strength. Lyra, the Caithar xenologist, was in a state of constant, ecstatic discovery. She spent hours with the human scientists, her mind reeling from the sheer volume of new information, new perspectives. The humans had a different way of seeing the universe, a different way of asking questions. They were not afraid of the unknown. They reveled in it. They saw it as a challenge, an adventure. The greatest revelation, however, came not from the scientists, but from the human ambassador herself. It was during a private conversation with Valen, in the quiet solitude of an observation deck overlooking the swirling clouds of the gas giant. "You must understand, High Counselor," Reed said, her gaze fixed on the cosmic ballet outside. "We are not a race of warriors, we are a race of survivors. Our history has been one of long, desperate struggles, against our own nature, against the harshness of our own world. We have learned through bitter experience that violence is a blunt instrument, a tool of last resort. It solves nothing. It only creates more pain, more suffering." Valen listened, his ancient mind trying to process this radical idea. The Caithar had built their empire on the foundation of military might. Their history was a litany of glorious conquests. The idea that violence was a weakness, a failure, was a concept that shook him to his core. "And yet," Valen said, his voice a low whisper, "you built a ship that could have destroyed us all, a ship that could have brought our dominion to its knees." Reed turned to face him, her eyes filled with a sadness that seemed as old as the stars themselves. "We built that ship not as a weapon, High Counselor, but as a shield against the darkness that we know lies in the heart of all sentient beings, the darkness that we have seen in ourselves. We built it to show the galaxy that there is another way, a better way, the way of peace, the way of understanding." And in that moment, Valen finally understood. The ship that shouldn't win, the small, insignificant vessel that had humbled an empire, it was not a warship. It was a teacher, a beacon, a promise of a future where strength was measured not in firepower, but in wisdom, in compassion, in the courage to choose peace in a universe that so often chose war. The alliance between the Caithar and the humans was forged not in the fire of battle, but in the quiet light of shared understanding. It was an alliance that would change the course of galactic history. The Caithar, with their ancient wisdom and vast resources, and the humans, with their boundless curiosity and their unpredictable ingenuity. Together, they were a force unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. But their journey was just beginning. The universe, it turned out, was far larger, far older, and far stranger than either of them had ever imagined. It was the humans who made the discovery. Of course, it was the humans. With their insatiable curiosity, their relentless drive to peek behind every curtain to open every locked door. They had been exploring a previously uncharted region of space, a dark, empty corner of the galaxy that the Caithar, with their more practical sensibilities, had deemed unworthy of attention. And there, in the cold, silent darkness, they found it. It was a structure, but that word was wholly inadequate to describe what they had found. It was a creation of impossible scale, a work of engineering that dwarfed even the most ambitious dreams of the Caithar. A sphere of woven light and energy so vast that it enclosed an entire star system. A Dyson sphere, but not just a Dyson sphere. This one was different. It was abandoned, silent, dead. A joint expedition was launched, a fleet of Caithar and human ships working side by side, their crews a mixture of two species who, not so long ago, had been on the brink of war. Valen and Reed stood together on the bridge of the human flagship, the Odyssey, the same ship that had once been a symbol of fear and now was a symbol of hope. They watched as the first images from the surface of the sphere were transmitted back to them. The sphere was a graveyard, a testament to a civilization that had reached a level of technological advancement that was almost unimaginable. And yet they were gone, vanished without a trace. There were no signs of war, no evidence of a natural disaster, just an eerie, profound silence. The exploration teams, a mix of Caithar and human scientists, ventured deeper into the sphere, their reports painting a picture of a civilization that was both awe-inspiring and deeply unsettling. They found Ides of crystal and light, parks with trees that sang with the music of the stars, libraries that contained the knowledge of 1 billion years. But they found no bodies. No bones, no ghosts, just an absence. It was a human linguist, a young woman with a gift for deciphering ancient, forgotten languages, who made the final, chilling discovery. In the heart of the sphere, in a chamber that seemed to be the central nexus of the entire structure, she found a single, repeating message, etched into the very fabric of spacetime. A message that had been broadcasting on a loop for millions of years. The message was simple, and it was terrifying. "It is coming, we could not stop it, run." A silence, colder and deeper than the void of space itself, fell over the bridge of the Odyssey. Valen and Reed stared at the translated message on the viewscreen, the words seeming to burn themselves into their minds. "What is it?" Valen asked, his voice barely a whisper. What is coming? Reed shook her head, her face pale. I don't know, but whatever it is, it was powerful enough to make a civilization that could build this, run. A civilization that could have extinguished our two species with a passing thought. The joy of their newfound alliance, the hope for a peaceful future, suddenly felt fragile, insignificant. They were two children playing in a sandbox, unaware of the approaching storm. But as Valen looked at Reed, at the determination in her eyes, at the quiet strength that had so impressed him from the very beginning, he felt something else. Not fear, but resolve. The humans had taught him that the universe was not a thing to be conquered, but a thing to be understood. And this was the ultimate mystery, the ultimate challenge. We will not run, Valen said, his voice ringing with a newfound conviction. We will face it together. Reed looked at him, and for the first time she saw not just an alien, not just an ally, but a kindred spirit. A fellow traveler on the long, dark road of cosmic history. She smiled, a small, sad but determined smile. Together. The ship that shouldn't win had not just won a battle. It had won something far more valuable. It had won a future. A future that was now uncertain, fraught with a danger that was beyond their comprehension. But it was a future they would face not as enemies, not as strangers, but as partners, as equals, as friends. And as the Odyssey turned, its bow pointed towards the great, silent unknown, a new story began. A story not of conquest, not of fear, but of hope. The story of two species, one ancient and wise, the other young and bold, standing together against the coming darkness. A story that would be whispered in the starlight for 1,000 generations to come. A story that was just beginning. The journey into the unknown was a slow, deliberate one. The Alliance, still in its infancy, had to learn to walk before it could run. Joint research outposts were established, scientific and cultural exchanges became commonplace, and the Caithar and human fleets began to conduct joint patrols, their once opposing ideologies now united in a common purpose. The initial fear and mistrust that had defined their first encounter had been replaced by a cautious optimism, a sense of shared destiny. Valen found himself spending more and more time with the humans, his fascination with their culture, their art, their messy, beautiful chaos growing with each passing day. He learned of their philosophies, their religions, their endless debates about the meaning of life, of consciousness, of their place in the universe. They were a species that was constantly questioning, constantly seeking, never satisfied with easy answers. It was a stark contrast to the Caithar, whose society was built on the foundation of ancient traditions and unquestionable truths. He discovered that the humans' greatest strength was not their technology, but their diversity, their ability to hold multiple, often contradictory, ideas in their minds at the same time. They could be both deeply spiritual and rigorously scientific. They could be both fiercely individualistic and profoundly compassionate. They were a paradox, a walking contradiction. And it was this internal conflict, this constant struggle between their better and their worse natures, that fueled their incredible creativity, their relentless drive to innovate. He also learned of their flaws, their arrogance, their greed, their capacity for self-deception. He saw that the same passions that drove them to create great works of art and to explore the furthest reaches of the cosmos could also drive them to commit acts of unspeakable cruelty. They were a dangerous species, not just to others but to themselves, and yet he could not help but admire them. He saw in them a reflection of the universe itself, a thing of both breathtaking beauty and terrifying power. The mystery of the Dyson sphere and the warning it contained remained the central focus of their joint efforts. Teams of scientists, both Caithar and human, worked tirelessly to decipher the message, to understand the nature of the threat that had driven a godlike civilization to flee. They pieced together fragments of data from the abandoned sphere, creating a mosaic of a civilization that had been both brilliant and naive. They had called themselves the Lumen, and they had believed, much like the Caithar had once believed, that they were the masters of the universe. They had seen themselves as the pinnacle of evolution, the final, perfect form of sentient life. They had grown complacent, secure in their power, blind to the darkness that was gathering at the edges of their perception. The threat when it came was not a fleet of warships, not an invading army. It was something far more insidious, a contagion, a mimetic virus, an idea so powerful, so seductive that it had spread through their collective consciousness like a wildfire, consuming their culture, their individuality, their very will to exist. It had promised them transcendence, a release from the burden of consciousness, a return to the sweet, silent oblivion of non-existence. And they had accepted, Willingly, eagerly, they had simply lain down and died. An entire civilization, a race of beings who could bend the laws of physics to their will, had committed collective suicide, seduced by a whisper from the void. The revelation sent a shockwave of horror through the Alliance. It was a threat unlike any they had ever conceived of. A weapon that attacked not the body but the mind. A weapon that turned a species' own greatest strength, its intelligence, against itself. The Council of the Caithar was thrown into a state of panic. Many argued for a retreat, for a return to their old ways of isolationism. They argued that to engage with such a threat was to invite their own destruction. To open their minds to the universe was to risk having them poisoned. But Valen, with the quiet support of Ambassador Reed and the growing faction of Caithar who had come to respect and admire the humans, held firm. He argued that to hide from the darkness was to surrender to it. The only way to defeat a bad idea was with a better one. And so the Alliance began to prepare for a different kind of war. A war not of ships and weapons, but of ideas, of philosophies. They began to build a firebreak, a mental shield. They delved into their own cultures, their own histories, searching for the stories, the beliefs, the values that gave them strength, that gave them a reason to live. The Caithar, with their long, stable history, had a deep well of tradition and wisdom to draw from. But it was the humans, with their messy, chaotic, often contradictory history, who provided the most potent ammunition. They had 1,000 different answers to the question of why life was worth living. 1,000 different reasons to fight for survival. Their art, their music, their literature, their religions. They were all a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to its ability to find meaning and beauty even in the face of suffering and death. The ship that shouldn't win had given them a new kind of weapon. A weapon forged not of steel and fire, but of hope. The hope that even in the face of a universe that was often cold and dark and terrifying, life, sentient, conscious, struggling, beautiful life, it was worth fighting for. And so they waited, not in fear, but with a quiet, steely resolve. They knew the whisper would come for them as it had come for the Lumen. They knew that the darkness was out there, patient, eternal, and hungry, but they were ready. They were united, and they had a story to tell. A story of two species from two different worlds who had found in each other not just an ally, but a reason to believe, a reason to fight, a reason to win. Not for glory, not for conquest, but for the simple, profound, and defiant act of existing. The final act of their long, strange journey did not begin with a bang, but with a song. A faint, almost imperceptible melody that began to echo in the minds of every sentient being in the known galaxy. It was a beautiful song, a siren's call of peace and release, a promise of an end to all struggle, all pain, all thought. The mimetic virus, the whisper from the void, had arrived. It spread with terrifying speed, a plague of apathy that swept through entire star systems. Species that had once been vibrant and full of life simply stopped. They ceased their work, their art, their living. They sat in their homes, their ships, their cities, their eyes glazed over, a faint, serene smile on their faces as their civilizations crumbled around them. The Caithar were not immune. Despite their preparations, despite their mental disciplines, the song found its way into their minds, preying on their ancient fears, their deep-seated desire for order and tranquility. The old guard of the council, the ones who had advocated for isolationism, were the first to fall. They saw the song not as a threat, but as a fulfillment of their deepest desires. A perfect, silent, unchanging universe. But the Alliance held. The firebreak they had built, the one forged in the crucible of their shared experiences, proved to be stronger than they had dared to hope. The humans, with their stubborn, illogical, often infuriating refusal to give up, became the anchor, the rock against which the tide of oblivion broke. They fought back not with weapons, but with noise. With their own songs, their own stories, their own messy, chaotic, beautiful art. They flooded the galactic communications networks with a cacophony of human expression. Rock and roll and classical music, epic poems and stand-up comedy, tragedies and love stories. A million different voices, all screaming the same defiant message into the void. We are here, we are alive, and we will not be silent. It was a battle for the soul of the galaxy, a war of ideas fought in the landscape of the mind. And it was a war that the humans, the chaotic, emotional, unpredictable upstarts, were born to fight. Valen, standing on the bridge of the Odyssey with Ambassador Reed, watched as the tide began to turn. He saw worlds that had fallen silent begin to stir. He heard new voices join the chorus of defiance. He saw the power of a single, simple idea, That life, with all its pain and its messiness and its uncertainty, was better than the alternative. In the end, it was not a grand, climactic battle that won the war. It was a conversation, a choice. A million individual choices made by a million different beings to keep listening to the music of life rather than the siren song of death. The whisper from the void did not die. It simply faded, receded into the darkness from whence it came, defeated not by a weapon but by a better story. In the aftermath, the galaxy was a changed place. The species that had survived were humbled, wiser, more connected. They had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had looked back, and they had chosen to live. The alliance between the Caithar and the humans became the foundation of a new galactic community, a coalition of worlds dedicated to the preservation of life, of consciousness, of diversity. Valen, now an old Caithar, stood with Evelyn Reed, now a venerable gray-haired human, on the observation deck of a new space station, one that orbited a newly terraformed world, a joint project of their two species. They looked out at the stardusted tapestry of the cosmos, a universe that was still vast and strange and full of dangers. But it was also a universe that was now a little less lonely. "Do you think it will come back?" Valen asked, his voice a low, rumbling whisper. Reed did not answer for a long moment. She simply watched the endless dance of the stars. "Probably," she said at last. "The universe is a big place. There's always another monster in the dark." She turned to him, her eyes, though old, still shining with that same fire he had seen all those years ago. "But this time," she said, a smile touching her lips, "we'll be ready, and we'll have a better song to sing." Valen looked at his friend, at this strange, fragile, and impossibly resilient being from a world of chaos and contradictions. And for the first time, he felt something that was entirely new to him. Something that was not fear, not awe, not even respect. It was a feeling of belonging, of home. The ship that shouldn't win had done more than just save the galaxy. It had created it. And as the two old friends stood there in the quiet twilight of their lives, they knew that their story, the story of the Caithar and the humans, was just one small verse in a much, much larger song. A song that was still being written. A song that would echo through the cosmos for all time. The song of life.